What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today's video, I meant to put out last week, but I was sick last week, so I apologize for that. So we're going to do it this week. This is going to be part 2 to the PowerPlant one. So the last video you would have seen would have been the PowerPlant part 1, which talked about the actual intricacies of the different types of power plants we can have on the 7.6. Excuse me, and that's between the GE, the CFM6, or the CF6, and the Pratt & Whitney 4000 series. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, and what we're going to talk about here in just a few slides, excuse me, is going to be the controls and indicators for the flight deck. So things you'll see inside the flight deck. And maybe that can help you determine on what type of engine you have on the aircraft. Not that you really care if you're a pilot and you're sitting in the airplane, you care that you have 2 engines. You don't really care who made them. You care that you have 2 of them and that they stay running the entire time. Okay. So first thing, let's talk about how do I know, or how can I find what type of engines I have on the aircraft? Do you know? Well, if you don't, let me show you. So, on your FMC, in the ident page, you can find your engine type. So, in this particular case, I was using a Pratt & Whitney. If you have a CF6, it'll tell you CF6, and then the CF680 A2, B, C2, whatever it is, it'll list it there. Now, what that tells you is that tells you if you have the difference between a Pratt & Whitney or a GE, right? Or if you have one of those special aircraft that do not seem to be very prevalent, you could have a Rolls-Royce. You could have the RB, I think it's the RB211 that they put on. However, those seem to be very few and far between. Not a lot of companies bought 7.6s with Rolls-Royce engines. So the primary ones that we're going to talk about are going to be the 4000 series and the CF6. But I'll say if there's stuff that's different, right, for the Rolls-Royce. I just don't have the visuals for it to go through it, because again, there's very few of them. Now, as far as you're concerned, inside the flight deck, again, you care that there's 2 engines on the aircraft and that they run. However, there is a little bit of a difference when it comes to the gauges that you're going to look at, and that's because of what we use for the primary power instrument when it comes to a particular engine. The GE engines use the primary power instrument of an N1. Okay. Pratt & Whitney, they like to use EPR. And so does Rolls-Royce. So if there's a Rolls-Royce, you're going to have an EPR gauge as well. Now, if you're not unfamiliar with EPR, that is engine pressure ratio. It's measured, that it's the difference between the front of the engine, the back of the engine, then there's some mathematical stuff that gets done inside of a computer, and then you get a number displayed on the gauge. Now, when we're looking at this, I've been told that EPR, or EPR, is a more accurate power measurement. Fine. It's not the most common. The most common is the N1 for the GEs. So when we're looking at this, we've got some indicators that are associated here. The little amber radio right here, that is the setting that is in the computer that says this is what your max EPR or your max N1 is going to be. The little green arrow or green caret, that is your setting for what your takeoff setting for N1 or EPR is going to be. So like right here, 1.57, guess what? That's 1.57. Over here, we got 103. Guess what? That's 103. So whatever the setting is, it's going to be the little green caret on the outside. Now, once you go and you get ready for takeoff and you push your little button that's going to say either thrust, N1, or EPR, it's your thrust setting on your mode control panel. As soon as you hit that button, the computer's going to take over and go up to whatever you have set in the computer, as long as it's not greater than your max that you're allowed to go up to, which is that amber radial. Now, you can see the EGT. Okay, EGT's on there, and then N1 is on there for both as well. So amber bands, red bands, they mean the same thing between the two engines. There's no real difference there. When we look at the secondary engine indications, I do have the Rolls-Royce visual for the secondary indication, and that's going to be an N3. That's the special thing about the Rolls-Royce, is it's a triple spool engine versus a dual spool like the GE and the Pratt & Whitney. So dual spool means you have an N1 and N2, right? You have a low pressure compressor, low pressure turbine, high pressure compressor, high pressure compressor, and a high pressure turbine. Whereas in the Rolls-Royce, you have an N3 that gets added in there. So you've got your N1 and N2 standard that you have in the first two, and then you have a special little N3. Now, there's no difference necessarily about how the engines actually perform. As far as, that's a lie. So Rolls engines are a little bit more expensive to work on. They're a little bit more expensive for parts. They're a little more expensive for basically everything, which is why most companies went with the GE and the Pratt & Whitney engines for their aircraft. Plus, the Rolls, they're just harder to find parts for because there's not as many of them. And the GE and the Pratt & Whitneys, obviously, they're more prevalent, so there's more access to them, right? The parts for them, so it makes them cheaper. But as far as performance is concerned, 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other is really what we're looking at, right? Like, we're talking a couple 1,000 pounds of thrust here and there between the engines. The spool up time might be a little bit different between them, but it's not going to be a ton to where you're going to be able to notice it. And, you know, if you're sitting there with a stopwatch figuring out how much of a difference there is in the spool up, that's on you. That's not on what anybody else that's normal does. But with that being said, the basis of what things are gauged on are different between the Rolls-Royce and the GE and the Pratt. So GE and Pratt, everything's based off of N2s. When we're talking about engine start and we're talking about the spool up of the engine, we're talking about how much the N2 is spinning. So, you know, we get 20% N2, you get the max motoring, you add fuel, boom, it goes off, and then at 50% N2, it, you know, the ignition goes from ground to auto. And that's great. On the Rolls, it's all based off of N3. Now I don't know the numbers off the top of my head because I've never dealt with a 7.6 with a Rolls-Royce engine. I've dealt with a 7.5 that had a Rolls engine, but not a 7.6. But when we're talking about this, we're talking just very little differences when it comes to the N3 numbers versus the N2 numbers. Now, granted, I think it's like 47% N3 or something like that is when everything clicks. And when we're talking about like engine failures, you know, on a GE or a Pratt, it's less than 50% N2. That 50% N2 is a number that is very prevalent. That's I'll have to edit that out. But the 50% N2 is very prevalent in the GE and Pratt world, where on the N3 world and the Rolls, it's 40-something%. Again, follow your book, follow your FCOM, follow your procedures for your company. Don't listen to some just random guy on the internet. Okay, another control and indicator, or another control, anyway, that is the same regardless of what engine you're using, is going to be these, your start select switches. So on the start select switches, you've got ground, auto, off, continuous, and flight, right? They're going to operate the same way on the engine regardless. Each engine has 2 igniters on it, okay? Each engine has 2 igniters regardless of whether it's a Rolls, a Pratt, or a GE. When it's in the auto position, there's going to be two reasons why they automatically ignite. Can you guess what they are? No? Okay. It's going to be whenever the flaps are out of the up position. So flaps out of up, your igniters start to ignite. Because you're close to the ground, you want the engine to keep running, right? So it turns on the igniters. The second thing is going to be when it's cold, you do what? Turn on your anti-ice. And when you turn on the anti-ice, it's going to start your igniters. Your igniters are going to start to fire because, again, you're in a cold environment. You want to keep the engine running, so the igniters continue to fire to be able to make sure that the engine stays running. Okay, that's the two reasons in the auto mode that's going to happen. Off, that's self-explanatory. If you need that explained to you, go ahead and leave me a comment and we'll have a conversation. Continuous. If you go into continuous, that should be self-explanatory as well. The igniters will run continuously. The only difference here is in continuous, it's only the selected igniter. Now, I know I don't have it on here, but this little switch right here above it is either going to say single, both, or it's going to say 1, 2, both. Again, it depends on the aircraft. If it's 1, 2, you have the number 1 igniter, the number 2 igniter. If it's in both, it's both. Okay, and number 1, number 2 does not mean left and right. It means the number 1 or the number 2 on that selected engine or on that engine. Because you have two igniters. So you got igniter number 1, igniter number 2. Okay. A lot of people get that confused. They think that 1 and 2 means left and right engines, and it doesn't. So you got igniter 1, igniter 2. If I have it selected to 1, igniter 1 fires. If I have it selected to 2, igniter 2 fires. It is a good practice for you to go back and forth when you're starting engines on multiple leg days or every other day or whatever. So if, let's say I've got a 3-leg day, right? First day or first leg, I start the engines, I'm in 1. Okay, so I'm using the 1 igniter to start the engines. Second leg, I'm using the 2 igniter. Third leg, I'm using the 1 igniter. What that does is that helps limit duty cycles on the igniters. Also, it ensures that we know those igniters work. The last thing you want to do is figure out that an igniter doesn't work when you really need it. So, it's a good idea to switch back and forth between them. I've heard guys use different things. Even days, they use number 2. Odd days, they use number 1. FO's leg, they use number 2. Captain's leg, they use number 1. I don't care. I'm not the one running your program. Do what your company says, but ensure that you're switching between them. Okay? That's all I'm saying. Now, flight. Anybody that's flown this airplane and anybody that's ever gone over the memory items of this airplane should know what flight does. Because when you have a dual engine failure, that is going to be one of your first steps. Ignition switches, starter ignition switch, or however it's written in your book, flight. And what does that do? Both igniters ignite regardless of which one's selected. So it overrides your igniter selector, is basically what that does. In the ground position, I've gone over this before in a couple other videos, but that's okay. I'm going to go over it again. We have the acronym SAIL, S-A-I-L. When you go to the ground position, your start valve opens, your APU goes into high flow. You have igniters that are going to be armed. They don't start igniting. They arm until you add fuel. Once you add fuel, now they start to ignite. Okay? And then L, load shed of the electrics. Load shed of the electrics. All of that happens damn near instantaneously when you go into the ground position. Okay? There's one other part if you're starting the second engine. For that A, the APU goes in the high flow. The APU bleed valve opens, and the engine bleed valve for the one that's already started, it closes. That's a whole different thing. You go to my pneumatics, bleed air, I think. I gotta remember which one it is. But in one of them, I talk about the logic behind it, right? So, again, ground, SAIL, S-A-I-L. That's start valve opens, APU high flow, igniters, arm, load shed of the electrics. Okay? If you've watched some of my videos before, you know that I like acronyms, and that's just one of them that I will freaking die by, because that's one that is ingrained in here and won't go away. So, hopefully we've got that figured out and we know that. Now, depending on whether or not the engine is FADEC or not. Now, even when it's non-FADEC, it's not really 100% non-FADEC. I know. That's kind of an oxymoron, really. FADEC is fully automated digital engine control or electronic control. And basically what that means is it's a group of things on the engine that work together as a complete system to run the engine on its own. And what I mean by that is it doesn't allow the engine to overspeed. It doesn't allow the engine to overboost. However, it'll let the engine overtemp like a mother. So you need to make sure you're paying attention to that. Okay. The reason that I put this up here and that I make sure that there's a difference. If you have a non-FADEC engine, the electronic engine control system, which is part of a FADEC system, is going to have an on and an off on the switch versus a normal and alternate. So normal and alternate is generally found on a FADEC engine. And what that means is the normal position, it's going to protect basically EPR N1 and N2 from any type of overspeed or overboost. It will not protect EGT from an overtemp. Nothing protects EGT from an overtemp other than your hand on the thrust levers. That's the only thing that can do that. And hell, sometimes that might not even work. On a non-FADEC, the EECs will either work or they won't. So they're either on or they're in op or off, right? They're either on or off. And I believe now that I'm saying that, I believe the actual switch says in op. It doesn't say off. So it's either on or in op. And if it's in op, now you have no overboost or over speed protection inside the engine other than you moving the thrust levers. Realize on this airplane that when you go full thrust lever and you go full to the wall and you try and put your fist through the ICAS, it will not overspeed the engines. It will not allow you to go over that max N1 or that max EPR if your EECs are working correctly. It does this by trimming fuel away from the engine to essentially starve it, right, to where it can't reach what you're asking. However, if it's in the alternate mode for a FADEC or an inoperative mode for a non-FADEC, now we're talking about having an issue. Now we're talking about if I take those thrust levers and I go boom, full, straight to the wall. Now we've got an issue. Now the engine can overspool, and now I can overspeed stuff. I can over temp speed, anything at that point, because the engine doesn't have the control. It's going to say, oh, you wanted 120% N1? Here, I'm going to try and give you 120% N1. Probably not a good idea, because I think the max is like 105. But still, it's self-critiquing in that manner. On the alternate side, when it's on the FADEC and it's in the alternate mode, if you are going to be in a situation where it's going to reach an engine limit or exceed an engine limit, it will actually yell at you on the ICAS and say, hey, engine limit something. I can't remember the exact word on it, but essentially what it says is if you do not move the thrust levers back and pull it back into a normal range, you're going to overspeed. So it doesn't protect it in the way that it does in the normal mode where it'll stop it from doing it, but it'll give you an alarm saying, hey, stupid, if you keep doing it this way, you're going to overspeed it. And that's not something you want to do either, right? So as far as the flight deck is concerned, there's really not much when it comes to these controls and indicators. So if you could, like, share, subscribe, comment. hit the notification bell like that just did. And let's talk about stuff. Let's find out what you guys want to know. If you want me to do a specific type of video, if you want me to do a specific type of system, if you want me to talk about something more in depth, please leave me a comment. You can send an email. I'll put it in here. It's brandon@gsi-guide.com. You can also send an email at gsi-guy-brandon@gmail.com. Both of those come directly to me. I try and answer them as efficiently as possible and as fast as possible. It's not always the case, but I'm running this all by myself, so sometimes life gets in the way and it takes me a minute to get back to you. But I will always reply. It just might not be in a timely manner all the time. But on that note, if there is anything you want to see, anything you want to talk about, go ahead and put it in the comments or send me an email, and I will try and make a video of it and talk about it. Outside of that, I am glad that you guys stayed until the end here. I appreciate you guys putting me over 500 subscribers. That is awesome, and I want to keep growing the channel as much as possible. I want to be the guy that when they say, I need training for a 7.6, I know exactly who we can go to. And check out the website. There ain't a whole lot on there. There's some. It's a work in progress, guys. If anybody's willing to volunteer and help for no pay, because I don't have any money and I don't make anything from any of this, reach out to me, because I'm more than willing to have people help as well. I'm hoping at some point I'll be able to add additional airplanes. I want to learn additional airplanes. I want to teach additional airplanes. I want to start doing stuff for general aviation. But it's all work in progress. It's all things I got to work towards. So there's that. Anyway, I hope you guys have a good night, evening, morning, whatever time it is that you're watching this, and I will see you on the next one.